Welcome to our movement segment today, where we are going to go through moving our pelvis in 3 different planes. And then we're going to come to side lying to do a side lying leg lift exercise. So I've got my yoga block for my pillow later on in side lying, but I'm going to start with my head on the mat. You're welcome to elevate it slightly on a few small pillows, or you can just come directly down onto the mat in hook lying position, knees bent, feet flat. And we're going to locate our hip points, or our ASISs. So at the front of the body, those bony landmarks that stick out, that are part of your pelvis. And you're going to start to rock those hip points towards your ribs and rock those hip points away from your ribs. So this exercise, commonly called a pelvic tilt, rolling the hip points towards the ribs and away from the ribs. And you'll likely notice when the hip points come towards the ribs, the space between hips and ribs shortens. And when hip points move away from ribs, the space lengthens. So just see if you can feel that a few times, the distance between hips and ribs shortening, the distance between hips and ribs lengthening. As you're pelvic tilting, you might also sense that as the hip points come towards the ribs, the low back will press gently into the floor. And as the hip points move away from the ribs, the low back arches and lifts away from the floor. So the low back presses into the floor and the low back arches away from the floor. Now we want this movement to be fluid and full of ease. So we don't want to be overly tense in the low back. We just want that pelvis to sort of rock between these two destinations. Now the last bit of info that I want to share is that the hip points are at the top of the pelvis. The sits bones would be at the bottom of the pelvis. So we have a top of this region and a bottom of this region. And so if you think about the hip points being part of the top of the pelvis, when the hip points rock towards the ribs, they also move to the back of the body. Hold there with the hip points towards the ribs, and notice how the top of the pelvis has rolled back. And then rock those hip points away from the ribs, hold there, and notice how the top of the pelvis has rolled to the front of the body. So we can also talk this through with roll the pelvis back as a cue, roll the pelvis forward, roll the pelvis back, hip points towards ribs, roll the pelvis forward, hip points away from ribs. And just do that a couple more times. Really let the pelvis flow as it rolls front to back. And then we'll pause in the middle. Fingertips can rest back on those hip points. And now I want you to think about your head being up, right at the top of the body. So head is up, foot or feet are down towards the bottom of the body. And you're going to take your right hip point and pull it up towards your head. And then take your left hip point and pull it up towards your head. So alternating, one hip point comes closer to your head, and then the other hip point comes closer to your head. You could also think about hip point up towards the armpit, hip point up towards the armpit. And you might already have noticed that down towards the foot. So let's change the cue and think, reach the hip point down towards the foot. And then on the other side, reaching hip point towards foot. And you alternate back and forth. And instead of the cue being to hike the hip up, it's more to unhike the hip and reach the hip point down. And this is what we call lateral tilting. So one half of the pelvis is going up towards the head, and the other half of the pelvis is going down towards the foot, a lateral tilt. And then we'll pause. We have one final plane of motion to move in, and that is moving side to side. So I'd like you to imagine tying puppet strings to your left and right hip points, and you're going to start to tug on the right hip point, and that right hip point is going to go towards the ceiling. And the ceiling is the front of your body, right? The front of your body is towards the ceiling. And then the left hip point is going to go towards the ceiling. And then the right hip point goes towards the ceiling. So as one hip point goes more towards the front of the body, and in this case, that reference is the same as the ceiling, the opposite hip point goes more towards the back of the body. So let's pause with that left hip point towards the ceiling and notice how the right hip point moves towards the floor. And then we'll bring that right hip point towards the ceiling, and the left hip point will move towards the floor. You keep going and keeping that low back relatively quiet, full of ease. And see if you can initiate this movement primarily from the pelvis. So the neck, shoulders, trunk are relaxed. The low back is very easy. And we're now rotating the pelvis left to right. Pause in the center. So we've moved our pelvis through all three planes of motion. And grab your pillow, your head support of choice. And once you've got that head supported, you're going to bend both your knees and line up your feet with your sits bones, so they're under the pelvis. And then we're going to lengthen the top leg, bottom arm where it's comfortable, bottom leg remains bent. And from here, can you make sure those hip points are stacked on top of one another, neutral pelvis, eye gaze on the horizon, and we start to lift and lower the top leg. So the pelvis is not moving. We're doing this lift and lower, keeping our hip points stacked on top of one another. Maybe you take your top hand and you rest it on sort of the side of your hip. Like if your leggings had a pocket, you would rest the hand on the side pocket. And then we're going to hold that leg hip height and turn the thigh bone in so the knee points down. Turn the thigh bone out, knee goes up. So the thigh bone turns in, knee down, thigh bone turns out, knee up. See if you can feel that your thigh bone is doing this turning. You might feel it right from the ball of the femur, the ball of the thigh bone, in a stable pelvis. Take breaks if you need. And then we're going to circle that leg about 5 times in one direction. So starts to get in there. And then circle that leg 5 times in the second direction, feeling those side bum muscles work, keeping that pelvis stable. Last time. Come down, bend that leg, soft little fist with the hand, and just give that side hip a little, woo, thank you. Thank you for your support, help. We're gonna come to the other side. I'm gonna flip around fully so that I can continue to face the camera. So we get ourselves set up, top arm resting on that side pocket, bottom arm wherever it's comfortable. The sunshine is coming in and giving me a bit of illumination around my face. We'll have to work with it. And then you're going to take that top leg, lengthen it out. Bottom leg stays bent for support, bottom foot and top foot in line with the sits bones, the bottom of the pelvis. And we start to lift and lower that top leg, keeping our hip points stacked on top of one another. So we shouldn't see a shortening of this top waistline. This top waistline should stay long, and the bottom waistline, we should maintain a little lift there. Upper body is relaxed. Top hand can come to side hip pocket or leggings side pocket. And we'll start to feel muscles working in and around that hand. Hold the leg at about hip height. Try not to let the leg drift forward, right? You want to keep that leg under the pelvis. Might even feel as though you're pushing it back. Turn the thigh bone in, the knee points down, toes as well. Turn the thigh bone out, knee points up. Turn the thigh bone in, knee down. Turn the thigh bone out, knee up. See if you can bring your focus to the thigh bone, in particular the ball, right, of that ball and socket joint, and try to move the ball of the thigh bone. It's tough. Hold, and we'll circle 5 big circles, keeping that pelvis stable, upper body relaxed, that side bum working, and switch the direction of your circle. As you fatigue, it can get harder to stabilize through that pelvis, so really work on that consistent stability. Come down, you can bend the top leg and give a little tap to that side hip. Press yourselves up to seated. And maybe go for a little walk about your space and see if your hips and pelvis are feeling a little looser, a little stronger, and maybe a little bit tired, but that's okay. Thank you.